Oprah saw it, and she went on Oprah, and that was the day where like, that was it. You were on Oprah, like the whole world knew about you. And the book was just re-released last year to much fanfare. And so it's really been on my mind lately, and it's called Your Money or Your Life. And in it, she basically makes the point that for most of us, money comes into our lives because we work for it, or someone near and dear to us has worked for it. So money we get in exchange for giving our life's energy to work. And so when we're spending money, what we're spending is our life's energy. And the process of paying attention to our money is really about honoring our life's energy, trying to squeeze the maximum amount of joy out of that as we can. And when you shift to thinking about it like that, I find energetically, it just makes me feel, I don't even want to, neutral, I think might be the best way. Like it demystifies the money somehow, and it makes it seem like, well, yeah, this is a result of my life's energy, and I want to be mindful and conscious about what I do with it.
I like that. That's a great perspective, because you're right. It just makes sense, and it demystifies it. Money just feels like the physical representation of this energetic thing that we can't see. So great. Give it a representation and deal with it. I like that. I'm going to have to pick up that book. Now, going back to you, you were raised in this environment where you were taught about money. You were shown you could do anything. You received your education. You received quite a bit of education. I'd like you to talk about that, but I'd also like to talk about how that was with the other women in your programs, both in terms of the numbers of women and in terms of how they were embracing their money story through those types of programs.
You know, it's really interesting, Laura. So and I'm glad you asked that question that way, because to me, the really exciting part is thinking about the differences that I saw. So educationally, I did my undergrad at Wellesley College, which is one of the seven sisters, and it's an all-women's college still today. It's where Hillary Clinton went to school, and Madeleine Albright went to school, and a number of CEOs of large corporations. And I also spent, when I was at Wellesley, my junior year abroad at Oxford, and then I have my MBA from Harvard Business School. And my experiences around, so I've had three very different environments to observe women with money. So at Wellesley, I noticed this strong sense of empowerment around money. And it wasn't overt. It was more like, well, of course, like I've got a great brain. I got here. This is the profession I want to pursue. I expect to be paid well for it, and I'm not going to apologize for anything. And then I went to Oxford, and part of it is just Brits are so much more reserved than Americans. Yes. So like you just don't talk about certain things in public. So there it wasn't as much of a gender driven issue as it was a societally driven issue. Like even the men didn't want to talk about it. And then I got to Harvard Business School, where all anyone wants to do is talk about money. But there are so many fewer women. My class was, I think, 30% women, and that was like one of the highest numbers, percentages. And that would have been back in the mid-90s. And so we were outnumbered dramatically. And interestingly, as I look back, I see this. I do not recall conversations around money. I recall conversations around careers and work that interested us, and ambition, and getting ahead. But that all seemed to be decoupled from money. Whereas a lot of the men would talk about their, I won't say the full word, they would call it the FU number, and the FU fund, and the amount of money that at which they would be able to say to any employer, like, I'm out of here.
Wow.
I didn't hear, I had an FU number in my head. And I think that was from my upbringing, but I do not recall that kind of conversation with my female peers. And they're crazy smart women.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't what we talked about.
Interesting. Something that I had noticed in law school, I don't know if you had a similar experience, it was about half and half.
Yeah.
The numbers were pretty equal, but there were fewer women who were seeking the more high paid types of law. Most women were wanting to be a family law practitioner or a juvenile law or some kind of a public service lawyer, whereas a lot of the men wanted to, lead a corporation, be getting the really high paid jobs. And here we all were at a private law school with student loans at this level that we could never all touch. And many of the professions that the women were seeking out would never have been enough to pay off that debt.
Yes. Yes. And I have two comments on that. First, I definitely saw that trend. And the way it manifested itself most clearly to me was when a guy in my class would announce that he was going into the nonprofit sector. It was like a shock to people. Yeah. When a woman announced she was going into nonprofit, no one blinked. So there was just this, you could see it so subtly and in that way. Now, I will say the flip side was also true. When women in my class said, I want to be CEO of a Fortune 500 company, nobody blinked at that either. So
okay, good.
There wasn't a penalty for owning your power when I was at Harvard Business School, but I did notice the eyeballs get raised when men expressed interest in career paths that weren't extremely lucrative.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first observation. And then the second one you bring up is huge. This issue of student loan debt and whether or not you're pursuing a career that will enable you to pay it off. Yeah. And I think that is one of the most under-discussed situations right now. We have more in student loan debt than we do in credit card debt in the U.S. And it's because we're taught education debt is good debt, and it's not a bad thing to take it on, but no one is saying the other piece, which is you have to think about how you're going to pay it off. And the reality is some career paths and businesses have higher payout structures than other, and it's just raw economics. And there are certain industries that are never, no matter how phenomenal you are at executing your job duties, going to pay you enough to pay off those student loan debts. And we don't talk about that.
No. And I fell into that trap a bit as well. The year I went to law school, it was the highest number of admissions and applicants because it was in the middle of the whole LA law frenzy. And I graduated and I had a job interview and I was so excited about it. And the guy offered me the job at $12 an hour. And I was like, what? With no overtime. And I said, I was in California at the time, and I said, I can't live on $12 an hour with no overtime, capped at that. And he said, you walk out of my office, 5 other people are going to take that job.
It blows my mind that we are allowed to take out so much money in student loans without any kind of safeguard or education or emphasis or discussion around the implications of that. And what it does when you're in a situation like that, where you may feel like, oh my God, well then I'm going to have to take $12 an hour and work for this jerk because I have these student loans. I don't have a choice. And that's what I just feel like the more people can talk about it. And I have a rule of thumb I use, which is, it's very wordy. So I'll say it first and then I'll explain it, which is don't take out more in student loans than you think you will earn on average over your first 10 years out of school, whether that's undergrad or grad school. So that doesn't mean what you earn in year 1 or what you earn in year 10. It's the average over that time period. And I do it that way because, doctors, for example, you start off making nothing when you're in residency, and then things can skyrocket from there. But the point is, if you take out more in loans than you expect to earn on average in your first 10 years, the odds of you being able to pay that off in any reasonable amount of time are slim to none, because even if you set aside 10% of your income a year to pay that off with interest, you're not going to pay that off for 15 plus years. And if it's private loans, it's going to be closer to 20 years. And that's if every year 10% of your income is going. And so if you take out more in loans than what you're earning, the math doesn't work if you want to save for other things and have enough around for fun things.
Yeah. And, this is a uniquely women's issue, I believe, as well. In my case, and things actually worked out, I did take out loans for law school. I was able to do my undergrad fine. I had law school loans. I practiced for 10 years. And then guess what? I wanted to be a mommy. I wanted to stay home with my kids like nobody's business. And wow, that derails your career. And I sure didn't want to say, I can't stay home because I have student loans. And, it worked out for me, but there's a lot of people that have those same desires and they can't. And you talk about choices and voices. Suddenly a choice is being taken away from you that maybe you didn't anticipate, because I too had this feminist, upbringing that you can bring home the bacon and fry it up in a pan and be the mommy and do this and. Yes, you can, but maybe that's not what you want to do. Maybe you want to be a mom for a while.
Well, and what I wish, and I'm so glad you're talking about this, Laura, because women can have that choice. It just requires that in your pre-motherhood years that you save even more, and you save a higher percentage, and you make sure you're not just saving the money, but you're also investing it. So what happens is the average woman spends 11 more years out of the paid workforce than the average man. And we do it because we're taking care of kids and or elderly parents. And what we find is if you take two, Jack and Jill, and they start off in the same job, right out of the gate, odds are high that Jack is getting paid more than Jill. And if you assume they both save 10% of their income and they both get 6% returns on their investments after inflation, so that's a real growth in those dollars. And you fast forward to retirement, but Jill has taken 11 years out mid-career, usually somewhere in the mid-30s to early to mid-30s. Jill ends up with half the retirement money as Jack as a result of taking those 11 years off. And that assumes, and this is Herculean, that when she decides to go back to work, she's able to get a job at the exact same salary that she left work at. And so the way we help women is by spreading the word to each other that we can have those choices, but we have to prepare for them by saving more and investing wisely prior to our career breaks.
I love that. I love that you talked about sharing that information, because it's very easy to fall into the false way of thinking, the false belief that it's only a few years out of the workforce, it won't matter. Compound interest, it does matter. Half. That's huge.
It's stunning, isn't it, Laura? I mean, yes. It is absolutely stunning. There are three headwinds that women face. We still earn less on the male dollar, and depending on what study and what sets of calculations are exactly how it's being calculated, women collectively earn 77 to 82 cents on the male dollar. And then you start breaking it out. And if you are African American, if you are Latina, I mean, those numbers